Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today is going to be a different kind of video because I'm usually not reacting to things that I already saw, and I'm not going to do that. But this story of this woman and what happened to her when she went to the Philippines at 67 years old just impressed me a lot. And why am I saying that and why do I want you to see this is because I'm going to go to the Philippines. And maybe this will happen to me as well, because the Filipino people are so beautiful that it change you, not just mentally, but it's hardwire your entire soul. Take a look at this and let me know what you think.
When I told people I was moving to the Philippines alone, most of them thought I was crazy. Not because I was moving overseas, because I was moving overseas by myself. No husband, no boyfriend, no family waiting for me. Just me, 2 suitcases, and a one-way ticket. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't completely sure it was the right decision either. I was 64 years old, retired, and had spent months watching videos about life in the Philippines. Most people seemed fascinated by the beaches. Others talked about how affordable everything was. But what caught my attention were the markets, the fresh fruit, the vegetables, the seafood. I've always tried to eat healthy, and I couldn't stop watching videos of people walking through local markets, buying fresh food for a fraction of what I was used to paying back home. The more videos I watched, the more I started imagining myself there. Eventually, I stopped asking, what if, and bought the ticket. The first sign that this wasn't just another vacation happened before I even boarded the plane. The airline agent looked at my passport, typed for a few seconds, then looked back up at me. "Do you have proof of onward travel?" My stomach immediately dropped. I knew the Philippines required it for tourists, but standing there at the counter, my mind suddenly went blank. Thankfully, a few days earlier, I had purchased one of those onward tickets I'd heard travelers talk about online. I pulled up the confirmation on my phone and handed it over. She looked at it, smiled, and gave me my passport back. "You're good to go." It was a small moment, but standing there at that counter, I remember thinking, this is really happening. A little while later, I was sitting at the gate. The excitement I'd felt for months was slowly being replaced by something else. Nerves. For months, this had been an idea. Now I was about to fly halfway around the world by myself. And there was no turning back. The flight felt endless. I watched movies, tried to sleep, looked out the window more times than I could count. But no matter what I did, I kept thinking about the same question. What if I've made a mistake? When the plane finally landed in Manila, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The moment I stepped outside the airport, the heat hit me. I knew the Philippines was tropical. I knew it would be warm. I wasn't prepared for that kind of heat. Within minutes, I was sweating. The next surprise was communication. I'd heard Filipinos spoke English, and many did. But I quickly discovered that didn't mean every conversation would be effortless. Sometimes communication was easy. Other times we'd both smile, laugh, and try our best to understand each other. After spending my entire life in the United States, even simple things suddenly felt unfamiliar. Ordering food, getting transportation, asking for directions, buying groceries, things I never had to think about back home suddenly required effort. By the time I reached my hotel that first evening, I was exhausted. Not physically, mentally. Everything around me was new. Everything required attention. Everything felt just a little outside my comfort zone. And for the first time since buying my ticket, I wondered if everyone back home had been right. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, partly because of the jet lag, partly because my mind wouldn't stop racing. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I opened my eyes and remembered. I was in the Philippines, alone, thousands of miles from home. I got dressed, grabbed my phone, and decided to go for a walk. Almost immediately, I noticed something different. People smiled. Not everyone, of course, but enough that it stood out. Back home, it wasn't unusual to walk through a parking lot, a grocery store, or even an entire neighborhood without speaking to anyone. Here, people seemed more willing to acknowledge each other. A smile, a nod, a quick good morning. It was a small thing. But when you're in a completely unfamiliar country, those small things matter. As I walked, I started noticing things I'd only seen on YouTube. The small stores, the tricycles, the street vendors, the little fruit stands. For months, I'd watched videos of these places from my living room. Now I was standing in front of them. That morning, I found a small market. Nothing fancy, just local vendors selling fruits, vegetables, fish, and meat. I must have walked around that market 3 times, not because I needed anything, because I was fascinated. The mangoes looked better than anything I'd seen back home. There were fruits I'd never heard of, vegetables I couldn't identify, fish so fresh they looked like they'd been caught that morning. For someone who enjoys healthy food, it felt like discovering a completely different world. I bought a few things I recognized and headed back to my hotel. The entire transaction probably took twice as long as it should have, partly because I was still learning, partly because I was nervous, but I remember feeling strangely proud afterward, not because I'd done anything difficult, because I'd done it myself. Back home, buying groceries was something I barely thought about. Here it felt like an accomplishment. Over the next few days, I started settling into a routine. Every morning I'd go for a walk, I'd explore a little farther, learn a few more streets, get a little more comfortable, but not everything was easy. The heat continued to wear me down. I'd step outside for 20 minutes and come back feeling exhausted. I quickly learned that the middle of the day was not the time for long walks. I also discovered that simple errands often took much longer than expected. Things that would take 10 minutes back home sometimes took an hour. At first, that frustrated me. Then I realized something. The Philippines wasn't asking me to move faster. I was the one trying to force everything to happen on my schedule, and little by little, I started slowing down. One afternoon, while sitting in a small restaurant, I noticed something. Nobody seemed to be in a hurry. People sat and talked. Families shared meals. Friends laughed together. They weren't constantly checking their phones. They weren't rushing to the next appointment. There was a different rhythm to life. At first it felt strange. Then it started feeling refreshing. For the first time in years, I realized how much of my life back home had been spent rushing, even in retirement. And somewhere during those first few weeks, something unexpected happened. The fear that had followed me onto the airplane started fading. Not disappearing completely, just becoming quieter. Each day I figured something out. Each day I became a little more confident. Each day the Philippines felt a little less foreign and a little more like home. Of course, not everything was as easy as taking morning walks and exploring markets. There were still moments when I felt completely out of place. One evening, I was sitting alone in my apartment, scrolling through photos I'd taken during my first few weeks. The market, the streets, the food, the people. On paper, everything looked great. But there was something I hadn't expected. Loneliness. Not all the time, not even most of the time. Just certain moments. The moments when something happened and I instinctively wanted to call someone. The moments when I saw families together. The moments when I realized I was thousands of miles away from everyone I'd known for most of my life. Back home, I had my routine, my favorite stores, my favorite restaurants, friends I'd known for years. In the Philippines, I was starting from zero. And at 64 years old, starting over isn't always easy. One question came up more than any other, both online and in person. People would eventually ask me the same thing. Are you planning to date? At first I laughed, because dating wasn't why I came. I'd been single for years. And I was perfectly happy with that. The truth is, most of the stories you hear involve men moving overseas and finding relationships. I wasn't looking for that. If I'm being honest, I was more interested in finding a good fruit market than finding a boyfriend. That said, I was curious. I occasionally wondered what dating would be like here if I ever changed my mind. But that curiosity was very different from actively looking. I didn't move to the Philippines searching for another person. I moved here searching for a different life. And that distinction mattered. What surprised me most wasn't romance. It was independence. Every week there seemed to be a new challenge. Figuring out transportation, learning where to shop, understanding how different services worked, finding reliable places for things I needed. There were plenty of mistakes, more than a few wrong turns, and a handful of moments where I felt completely overwhelmed. But every time I solved a problem on my own, my confidence grew. I started realizing something. For years, I'd underestimated myself. Somewhere along the way, I'd started believing that certain adventures belonged to younger people, that starting over belonged to younger people, that moving across the world belonged to younger people. Yet here I was, doing it, one day at a time. A few months after arriving, I found myself sitting in a small cafe watching people walk by, and a strange thought crossed my mind. For the first time since arriving, I wasn't thinking about whether I'd made a mistake. I wasn't comparing everything to America. I wasn't wondering if I'd eventually move back. I was simply living my life. That realization caught me off guard, because without noticing it, the Philippines had stopped feeling like a temporary experiment. It had started feeling normal. And that's when I knew something had changed. I wasn't just visiting anymore. I was building a life here. Not a perfect life, not a stress-free life, just a life. And somehow, that felt even better. Around that same time, the phone calls from home started changing. In the beginning, people mostly asked questions. How's the food? How's the weather? Do you feel safe? Have you met anyone yet? But after several months, the questions became different. So, are you staying? I realized I didn't have a simple answer. When I first arrived, I told myself I was just trying something new. If it didn't work out, I could always go back. That thought had been comforting. It made the decision feel less permanent. But now months had passed. I had favorite restaurants, favorite walking routes, favorite vendors at the market. I knew which places sold the freshest fruit. I knew where to buy groceries. I knew how to get around. Without realizing it, I'd built routines. And routines have a funny way of turning a place into a home. One morning, I had an experience that probably wouldn't seem important to anyone else. I woke up with a minor health issue, nothing serious, but serious enough that I needed to see a doctor. Back in America, I would have known exactly what to do. Here, I wasn't entirely sure where to go. A year earlier, that situation would have terrified me. Now, I simply figured it out. I asked questions, got directions, found a clinic, and handled it. As I sat there afterward, I realized something. The problem itself wasn't important. The fact that I'd solved it without panicking was, because that's what this journey had really been about. Not moving to the Philippines, not retirement, not even starting over. It was about proving to myself that I was still capable of adapting, capable of learning, capable of taking risks. For years, I had unknowingly started putting limits on myself, not because anyone told me to, because that's what happens when life becomes predictable. You slowly stop challenging yourself. You stop testing yourself. You stop discovering what you're capable of. Moving to the Philippines changed that. It reminded me that growth doesn't have an expiration date, adventure doesn't have an expiration date, and neither does courage. People often ask me if moving here was the best decision I've ever made. The truth is, I don't think that's the right question. Every major decision comes with trade-offs. There are things I miss about America. Friends, family, certain comforts, certain conveniences. No place is perfect. The Philippines certainly isn't. But if someone asked me whether I regret getting on that plane, the answer is easy. Not for a second. Because somewhere between the nervous woman sitting at that airport gate and the person I am today, I found something I wasn't expecting. Confidence. Not the confidence that comes from knowing exactly what will happen. The confidence that comes from knowing you'll figure it out. And that's a very different thing. When I arrived in the Philippines, I thought I was searching for a new place to live. What I actually found was proof that I could still build a new chapter of my life, even at 64, even alone. And honestly, That may have been the greatest surprise of all.